No matter how much we as viewers might like or even love a TV character, there's no denying that feeling in your bones when you just know they're not long for this world. For one reason or another, they just seem destined to be killed off sooner or later. Perhaps they're a likeable supporting player ripe for a devastating demise, or a brilliantly detestable villain whose death will prove enormously satisfying for audiences. Sometimes you just see a character and immediately peg them to die. And yet, sometimes these characters actually make it to the end of the show very much alive. So with that in mind, I'm Ellie with What Culture, here with 10 TV characters nobody expected to survive. Number 10. Samwell Tarly in Game of Thrones. For those who hadn't read George R.R. Martin's novels, Game of Thrones quickly established itself as a ruthlessly bloodthirsty show where basically any major character could die. And as likeable as Samwell Tarly was throughout the show's run, the guy just wasn't cut out for fighting, and it seemed like just a matter of time before some ne'er-do-well would put a knife to his throat to just prove that point. Despite his lack of physical prowess and generally retiring demeanour, Sam inexplicably survived all the show's 8 seasons, even with a number of close calls which had some fans screaming plot armour. Sam survived a barrage of wights during the Battle of Winterfell and has generally scraped his way through a number of combat encounters which have killed men considerably more adept than he. Sam's death would have been hugely devastating to fans, which seemingly made it all the more likely that it would actually happen in Thrones' final season. But Sam instead made it out alive and ended the series as Grand Maester to King Bran the Broken. Who saw any of that coming? Number 9. PAULIE GAULTIERI in The Sopranos. In fairness, The Sopranos had such a no-holds-barred approach to even its major characters, especially in that final season, that just about anybody seemed fair game to be whacked. But as hilarious and oddly likeable as Paulie Walnuts was, it sure seemed like he was getting teed up for a dirt nap in Season 4, when his loose-lipped discussions with Johnny Sack caused a major headache for Tony. With the amount that Paulie talked, he showed himself to be a major potential liability for Tony, and beyond that, as funny as he might be to us, somebody like that would be supremely annoying to be around all day long. Despite so many of Paulie's comrades dying in the show's final stretch, he somehow made it to the end in one piece, proving just slippery enough to elude a fate that seemed inevitable for most of the series' run. Number 8. Carol in The Walking Dead. The Walking Dead's Carol is an especially interesting case given that her comic book equivalent dies relatively early on in the story. Yet due to the unexpected popularity of Melissa McBride's performance and her chemistry with Daryl, the showrunners kept her alive. For the series' first few seasons, many fans dismissed Carol as a relatively unremarkable member of the ensemble who could certainly be killed off if the time occasioned it. But as Carol became a more self-actualized character, her popularity rose. Though during the show's 11th and final season, speculation nevertheless rose that she might be the final major character to die, to close the show out with a serious emotional jolt. Yet it never happened. The last time we saw Carol, she was safe and sound and saying farewell to Daryl as he left to search for survivors out in the world. Carol came so far from her characterization in Season 1, and her survival was very much earned as a result. Number 7. Reginald Bubbles' cousins in The Wire. More than basically any other show not called Game of Thrones, The Wire didn't care for sentimental attachments. If a character had to die because it fit the story, it was going to happen. From the moment we met homeless heroin addict Bubbles in the show's very first episode, it seemed like a foregone conclusion that he'd end up overdosing or being killed in a drug deal gone wrong. Bubbles hung in there, but by the time Season 4 rolled around, he was racked with suicidal levels of guilt over the accidental overdose death of a teenager he informally adopted. As such, it was tough to believe he'd find a way out of this hole of addiction and grief-fueled despair. But at the start of the 5th and final season, Bubbles was shown to be clean from drugs for an entire year, and in the series finale got something approximating a happy ending when he reconciled with his sister. If Bubbles had died a few episodes into The Wire's first season, nobody would have been even remotely shocked, but he made it all the way to the finish line. Number 6. Rupert Giles in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Given that Joss Whedon has a borderline sadistic penchant for killing off fan-favourite characters across his various TV shows and movies, it's a genuine shock that Buffy's beloved mentor and father figure, Rupert Giles, received a stay of execution for the show's entirety. He's actually the sort of character Whedon typically kills off with savage abandon, near universally liked among the fanbase, smart and charming as hell, and a figure of major emotional significance to the protagonist. His demise would have been a truly shocking, potentially devastating moment for both Buffy and fans. Yet despite having his fair few run-ins with death across the series, Giles survived all the way to the very end. Whedon evidently had great fun teasing Giles' death by axe in the show's 7th and final season, but it mercifully never came to pass, and he also survived the climactic battle in the series finale. Phew. Number 5. Roger Sterling in Mad Men. Though many Mad Men fans were convinced that Don Draper would fling himself out of his office window by series' end, mirroring the show's opening titles, the character who truly seemed destined to die was Don's pal and colleague Roger Sterling. In addition to being a heavy smoker and drinker, Roger suffered 2 heart attacks in the show's first season alone, yet despite this and his continued hard living, he somehow survives past the series finale. Roger was long overdue a 3rd and potentially fatal heart attack by the time Mad Men's final episode aired, yet seemingly flouted his fate and kept on living the good life to everybody's surprise. Would Roger's death have been predictable? Sure, but it also would have been totally realistic for a man of his lifestyle. Granted, just because Roger survived the show, it wouldn't shock anyone if he killed over a hot minute after the final episode's credits rolled. Number 4. Mandy in 24. 24's Mandy stands as one of the series' very few major villains to actually remain alive by the end of the show's 9-season run. Mandy was first introduced in 24's pilot episode where she blew up a passenger jet as part of a plot to assassinate Senator David Palmer. Mandy disappeared a few episodes later, only to shockingly re-emerge in the season 2 finale, where she administered a nerve agent to now President Palmer as part of a second assassination attempt. Mandy wasn't seen again until the very end of season 4, where she was revealed to be part of a plot to kidnap Secretary of Defense James Heller. With Mandy taking fan favourite Tony Almeida hostage in her attempt to escape, it seemed like a dead certain opportunity for Jack Bauer to finally take her down for all the trouble she's caused. But alas, Mandy was instead captured alive and eventually granted immunity for cooperating with CTU, after which she basically disappeared off the face of the Earth. Number 3. Gaius Baltar in Battlestar Galactica. Battlestar Galactica's Gaius Baltar is about as delicious as TV villains come. A shamelessly narcissistic, self-serving coward who fans simply couldn't wait to see get his just desserts by series' end, no matter that his character matured considerably in later seasons. For one, the guy was largely responsible for the Cylons' genocidal campaign against the 12 colonies, causing at least 20 billion deaths in the process. That was certainly enough to make Gaius seem destined to die at some point in the series, especially once he was put on trial for his part in the genocide. And yet he proved so damn entertaining in spite of, or perhaps because of, his enormous character flaws, that he ultimately stuck around to the bitter end. Still, the majority of the fanbase surely expected him to either get strung up for his actions or die a redemptive, sacrificial death of some sort. Nope, on both counts though. Number 2. Benjamin Linus in Lost. Lost's Ben Linus is one of the all-time greatest TV villains who fans just couldn't frickin' wait to see die. Even though Ben became a more ambiguous figure in later seasons, there's no denying the extent of his terrible actions which made him ripe for a killing. For starters, he's either directly or indirectly killed countless residents of the island, not to mention kidnapping and torturing en masse, and even sacrificed the life of his own daughter, Alex. As Ben became a less villainous character later in the series, it seemed highly likely that he'd earn a redemptive death. And yet, Lost ended with Benjamin Linus still in one piece. Hell, to take it one step further, even when the majority of the surviving characters entered the church to move on in the series finale, Ben decided to stay behind to work some things out. From his earlier, more squirrely villainous demeanour, Ben seemed guaranteed for the chopping block, but he remained very much alive right to the very end. Number 1. Pastor Tim in The Americans. Sometimes you just feel like a character is marked for death the moment you first see them, and that's most certainly the case with The Americans' Pastor Tim. Tim quickly becomes a real problem for undercover KGB agents Elizabeth and Philip Jennings through his interactions with their daughter Paige. Paige eventually tells Tim that her parents are Russian spies, an act which seems to guarantee Tim's impending demise, enough that Elizabeth and Philip indeed plot to kill him once they know what he knows. Though they ultimately don't go through with it, it still seems like just a matter of time before this well-meaning man ends up on a morgue slab, especially once he passes Paige's confession on to his wife Alice. All this combined with a large portion of the show's fans absolutely loathing Tim for much of the show's run, and it's genuinely shocking that he survived all the way to the conclusion. And that concludes our list. If you think we missed any, then do let us know in the comments below, and while you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe and tap that notification bell. Also, head over to Twitter and follow us there, and I can be found across various social medias just by searching Ellie Littlechild. I've been Ellie with What Culture. I hope you have a magical day, and I'll see you real soon.